Hi, everyone, and welcome to Heritage Seeds. I hope you're all doing well today. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I am Debbie Martin. I am a Colorado Master Gardener with Garfield County Extension. And Jennifer Prosmo is with us, Prosser. I don't know why I always say, because I see what's written there. And Jennifer will be answering chat questions or prompting me to answer or. So feel free to put in questions. And we'll get started if I can get my screen to share.
Yes, so do we want to tell everybody about the interpretation?
Please.
I can do that real quick.
Thanks, Alex.
I am okay, everybody, thank you. We just went right for it, which is fun. If you are listening to this, I just wanted to make sure that you know that it is being recorded. You can communicate with us through the chat and through the Q&A. If you actually have questions for the presenter, go ahead and use the Q&A because that'll save the questions for the appropriate time to answer them. This is also being presented in English and Spanish simultaneously. If you would like to listen to it in Spanish, you can go down to your Zoom options, which are at the bottom of your screen. At the bottom right of the menu, you're going to see a little gridded globe icon. Click on that and it'll show you either English or Spanish. Click on the language of your preference. If you're having some issues with feedback, go ahead and mute the original audio. And if you have any questions about how to use these functions, please type it in the chat. I will be having my eyes on it so we can get that going for you as soon as we can. And now we are all good to go. Go ahead, Jennifer.
It's Debbie, and go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm just saying hello, and I'm with Debbie. We're from Colorado Master Gardeners, and I will be monitoring your questions and either answering them or letting Deb answer them. And I am turning it over to Deb.
Great, thanks. So welcome, everyone. And I hope you're here to hear something about saving seeds and a little bit on seed banks. So why do you want to save seeds? Well, everybody has their own reasons as to why, but I listed a whole bunch that I could think of. My favorite is because it's fun to do. But you can save money. A lot of people save seeds because they got them passed down from their family, or it's just a specific crop that you really like and would like to keep true. So we have lots of steps. We need to plan. We need to observe plants' traits. We need to know when your seed is going to be mature, when to harvest your seeds, how to store your seeds, and growing your saved seeds once you've saved them. So we'll go through each of those steps here in a few slides. One of the first things I want to mention is there are protected seed sources. Many beans and roses, a lot of flowers are protected. They're you're not allowed to grow them for seed. So make sure whatever it is that you are purchasing to grow from seed or saved seeds from, in fact, that it's legal to do so. One would think that if you weren't selling those seeds, it would be okay. That is not the case. Would anyone ever catch you at it? Probably not. But if they did, it's an enormous fine. So just check to make sure that those seeds don't have some type of copyright, etc. on them. How long it takes to produce seed. Some plants only make seed every other year, and many trees won't produce fruits for many years. So you can't necessarily grow something this year for its seed, but most of the plants that we grow will produce seeds every year or every other year. Another thing you need to think about is the pollination method. And we're going to go into detail on several of these steps here. But the pollination method, they could be wind pollinated, they could be insect pollinated, human pollinated, they can pollinate themselves. You need to think about that so that if you don't have cross pollination from other plants that you didn't want them to cross with. And therefore you need to think about where are you going to plant them so that they can be protected and will breed true. Heirloom plants will reproduce true to type when pollinated by the same plant. And seed packages will tell you that they are heirloom if they are, and plants themselves will often be labeled as an heirloom if they are. Hybrid plants are the result of cross-pollinating two different plants to get the traits that you want. So the rose there in the picture, that's a hybrid. It's not a heirloom. So if I were to collect the seed from it, I would end up getting something, some rose, but not necessarily this rose. It could be that I get a different color, or I get one that's not as hardy, various genetic things, because it will tend to try to go back to one of its parents. Another thing you need to think about is how is it pollinated? Can it pollinate itself? Or does it have to be pollinated by something else? So we would like it to be self-pollinated if possible, so that we can produce seeds that are true. We want to be careful about cross-pollination because then you can end up with a hybrid. If you want it to breed true, even if it is cross-pollinated, it needs to be cross-pollinated by a plant that is the same plant it is, that is also an heirloom. Hope that made sense. So who all can pollinate? Birds, especially the hummingbirds, will cross-pollinate for you, will pollinate for you. Wasps, bees, flies, dogs, humans, bats, a lot of different animals will pollinate for you, as well as wind and water, rain. There's three main pollination methods: airborne, self-pollinated, and insects. So corn is pollinated by the wind. You probably are used to seeing the silks, and the wind will blow from one to another. Beans are an example of something that self-pollinates. The plant can pollinate itself. And insects, of course, pollinate a lot of our plants. So some airborne pollen vegetables: beets, spinach, corn, Swiss chard. Self-pollinated: beans, chicory, endive, lettuce, peas, tomatoes. They can all pollinate themselves. And then a whole lot of things are pollinated by insects. Around here, some of the high pollinators as far as insects go are bees, not just the honeybees. We have many native bees, and they will do a lot of pollinating, as well as ladybugs and less desirable insects, but they are doing pollination for us. And I included biennial vegetables. Biennial vegetables only produce seed every other year. So onions, as an example, if you plant them from seed, you plant seed this year, it will grow an onion, but it will not go to seed. If you leave it in the ground, next year it will produce seed. So there's a list of plants that are commonly grown in the garden that are biennial. There are also flowers that are biennial, but most of our flowers will produce seed every year. Questions before we move on? Jennifer, anybody out there?
Let me double check again. No questions so far.
Okay. So we're still in the planning process. How many seeds, how many plants do you need to get your seed. The suggestion is that you get 1 seed per plant. I generally go with 3 or 4 seeds per plant personally, but they do say to try to grow enough that you can take just 1 seed from each plant. When you're choosing, choose from your healthiest plants. Do not take seed from plants that are diseased. So the top one here is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's some green beans that are in good shape. Down below here, there's some green beans that have been plucked, but they also are diseased. And these onions over here happen to be diseased. You wouldn't want to take the seeds from the diseased plants because they'll have a disease. Another thing you need to think about is how much sun does that particular plant need? How much water does it need, and can I get the water to it? And then the pollination method. If it's airborne pollination, you need to have a 1 mile isolation from anyone else growing that. So as an example, let's go back to the corn. If I'm growing sweet corn and my next door neighbor is growing field corn to feed their pigs, because I'm less than a mile away from them, my corn, my sweet corn, can be pollinated by their field corn, and I won't have sweet corn from my seeds. So that's something that you'll want to talk with your neighbors about if you happen to be planting something that is airborne pollinated. Insects and birds, they can travel 1/4 mile, which is still a fairly large distance, given that most of us are probably living in town. And then if they're self-pollinated, it's just a few rows. So as long as you're growing just one type of bean in your garden, you're okay. But if you're going to grow, I switched to beans for self-pollinated. If you're growing beans and you're growing 3 different kinds, if they're all in one row, you can get a hybrid with your seeds. But if you're only growing one kind, then it will breed true if you had an heirloom to begin with. Once again, choose the healthiest specimens. So look at your plants as they're growing. Of course, you won't be able to see the beautiful roots in the ground, but you will be able to tell from what's above as to whether or not that is a healthy plant. And then pick the ones that have the traits you desire, such as length of maturity, cold hardiness, taste, type of pollinator. I tend to choose for taste first, that's just mine. Cold hardiness, simply because of where we are. When was I able to plant that seed, and how cold did it have to get before the plant quit producing? And then length to maturity. Obviously, the shorter it is, the longer we have for our plants to grow and produce the seed, because most of the seeds are going to have to get mature. Do we have a question? Is there?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Excuse me, can I say, the question and answer icon at the bottom is not recording questions, but they're questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Jennifer, can you check chat for us?
All righty. On the chat, I just have the welcome and the registration totals and the viewers on Facebook.
Okay.
Yes, our chat is working. Sadly, the Q&A function is not working at the moment. It is a Zoom thing, so we can take questions from our participants through our chat.
Great. So hopefully everybody heard that. If you have a question, put it in the chat instead of the Q&A, please and thank you.
Okay, I've been putting them in the chat, so I don't know why you're not seeing them.
Oh, Sue, that's because you're sending them to me directly.
Ah,
So
okay.
send them to
thanks.
everyone. Sue.
Yes,
And
sorry.
Alex, as long as we've stopped, why don't we tell us what the questions were,
Okay.
if you don't mind, since you can see them.
Okay, I'm trying to chew.
Okay, here we go. I
Okay.
do have the questions. Would you like me to proceed, Sue?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first question I have is, how are the seeds protected?
They're
Yeah.
protected by where you have planted them.
No, that was in regard to the first, in the very beginning, when you said some seeds are protected and you're not allowed to grow them. So what does that mean that they're protected?
They have a copyright on them, a lot of, almost all roses. And they will actually say on the tag when you buy them that they are, have a copyright on them.
So Deb, if we look at, say we were looking at roses or a vegetable and it's
Uh-huh.
protected, we look at the envelope, and on the envelope, will it be written out, this is a protected seed, or this is copyright seeds?
Yes, it
Or is there
will.
a symbol? What do you see
I
on
don't
that?
know if, I don't know if there's a symbol, but yes, it will have it on there in writing.
Okay,
And you will see it more often on live plants than you will on seed.
ah,
Okay.
So a lot of people, you buy a beautiful rose and you think, oh, I want to grow seeds and have more of those, or even just propagate it by cloning it. And that is not legal
all
because
right.
if they're protected.
All right.
Any other questions?
The next question from Sue was, what are the requirements to get the label heirloom?
They have to have produced seed that is true to type for at least 5 generations. So they have to show that they aren't reverting back to anything. The other way is to show in some manner, and I'm not sure how you would do this, but to show in some manner that this seed has been out in the world for 5 or more years.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I often wondered because most of the time when you buy seeds and it's labeled heirloom, it's a more expensive seed. So I wondered if there was some kind of regulation to prevent people from labeling things that are as heirloom.
Yes, that is a protected word.
Okay.
So if you are buying something that is labeled heirloom and it isn't, then someone's selling it illegally. But all of the seed companies are going to be labeling them. If they label it heirloom, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Perfect. And we do have one last question. Are insect and bird pollinators impacted by chemical fertilizers and pesticides?
Yes, they are. Both birds and. So you want to be careful about what you spray with or use as fertilizer, because yes, you could be harming insects you don't want to harm, and or the birds, particularly hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are very sensitive.
And are chemical fertilizers just as bad as the pesticides? Or is that not? Yeah.
It depends on what the fertilizer is. So a lot of the fertilizer, even though it's dried or chemical, is something like urea. And no, that's not dangerous. So you just need to pay attention to what you're buying as fertilizer.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Sure.
so one of the things we emphasize as master gardeners is read your labels carefully, because those labels on whether it's a pesticide or insecticide, they should say what the damage is or if it's poison and what it affects. So always check those labels with a magnifying glass, because their writing is small if you need to.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so now we'll just move on if there aren't any more questions at the moment. And we're at the step we're at is know when your seed matures. you would, and that will be on, if you're buying seeds, that will actually be on the package that the seed comes in. However, it's going to tell you when it is mature for the purpose you want it for. So if it's vegetables, it's going to tell you when it's mature for eating. And if it's a flower, it's going to tell you when it's going to go in the flower. If it's a fruit, it's going to tell you when the fruit is ready to ripe for you to eat. That's not when the seed is mature. The seed is mature after that. So if you've got something like beans or peas, you can dry them on the plant. And now you know it is ready for you to start storing. That's when it's mature in the sense of seed saving. Tomatoes are interesting. Whether they're inside or outside, it's always in an overripe fruit. And we sometimes get questions as master gardeners at my tomatoes growing something. Well, it's growing another tomato because it got overripe. Or it's putting seeds on the outside of the tomato rather than inside. Well, that's because it's overripe and those seeds are ready to be planted. So that's what's happening with tomatoes. Flowers, carrots, snapdragons, whatever kind of flowers. If you can let the seed dry on the plant, that's all the better. If you have to pick it before it's dried on the plant, it may or may not be a viable seed. So basically the answer is let it go to the full maturity on the plant and dry itself on the plant. Is it legal to collect seed? Well, it's legal if there wasn't something on the package that said it wasn't. You can assume that it's legal. Should you harvest your seed or leave it on its own nature? You can leave a lot of seeds to their own nature. However, there are plants that we want to grow that the seed cannot go through a freeze. So it's going to depend on what it is. Most greens, most flowers that we tend to grow around here will be fine to just let them be, and they can just mature on the plant and fall off, and there they'll have them, but you'll have them in that same spot. If you want to plant them in a new spot, you'll need to actually harvest the seed. And there's never anything wrong with harvesting the seed or leaving it, either one. It's just whatever you prefer. Do the seeds have special requirements for germination? Some do. A lot of seeds have to go through a freeze before they will germinate. Those will tend to be our native seeds, so native flowers and native grasses for here that grow in our area. They need to go through a freeze. If you collect the seed and then don't let it freeze, you're going to need to put it in your freezer and let it freeze, and then you can plant them. Where and how will you store them? We'll get into that in a few minutes. So harvest the pod crops when the seeds are dry. Leave your squash for after the first frost. That way they'll be the most, will have grown as long as they can. Separate them by variety. So if you're maybe going to collect seed from beans and seed from squash and seeds from your snapdragons, don't store them all in one bag. Separate them into the various bags. Label them. Include what it is, why you liked it, why did you save that plant in the first place, when did you plant it, and how long did it take for it to mature. That way you'll know for future use. And then you might want to make sure if you had to harvest early, that you dry the seeds more thoroughly in the sun or in a jar with rice. Plants with fleshy fruits. There's there are two methods that for collecting the seeds, the wet method and the dry method. And we're going to go over the wet method first. So tomatoes, cucumbers, squashes, all those things that have the seeds hidden inside. We'll start with tomatoes. Tomatoes like to ferment their seeds. So you're more likely to get your tomatoes to your seeds if you have to germinate, if you have stored, if you have let the fruit over ripen and actually sit there and kind of rot, ferment for a few days. Then you can scoop out the seeds and separate all the gunk that's around them so that they're cleaner seeds. Put them in a mild bleach solution so that you can kill some of the diseases and then rinse them off right away with clean water. Now you will definitely need to let them dry in the sun because they're not going to be dry. Others, you can simply just wipe off the pulp, allow it to dry, let it sit in the sun for a few hours. As soon as they're thoroughly dried, you can store them. Leave your cucumbers and squash on the vines and then till they're after the frost, and then the seeds will be generally ripened enough that you can go ahead and use them. And wait for your eggplant to actually shrivel. So actually leave it on the plant and let it shrivel. So something you might have noticed with all of these is you are going to lose produce for the seed. This is all produce you're not going to get to eat. So as an example, if you're growing an acorn squash, because you love acorn squash, you're giving up, in theory, one squash for every seed. I wouldn't do that myself. I would give up one squash, maybe two, for all the seed that I wanted. But I certainly wouldn't give up one squash per seed because I don't have enough area for that. And if you do, that's wonderful. If you don't, you just do the best you can. There's the dry method. Plants that you can actually let the seed dry on the plant. And that tends to be peas, beans, a lot of root crops, herbs, flowers. Almost all of those you can let the seed just dry right on the plant. Once it's completely dry on the plant and starts to fall off, that's when you can collect it because you'll know it is fully mature. Peppers. You want to actually wait until the pepper has reached the color of its maturity and has some wrinkles. So even if you prefer to eat that pepper green, let it turn red if that's the color it is at maturity. Examples there would be bell peppers, where we often harvest them green to eat, but in fact, the seed won't be mature unless it has turned red or yellow or orange. Jalapenos are another one. Jalapenos will generally turn red. So make sure that your pepper is mature before you collect seeds. Questions?
I did not see any questions. I did want to comment
ahead.
on oh, here's one. This is from Sue Gray. How do you protect seeds from animals and birds when leaving the plant to mature, especially corn and beans? The birds and deer like them.
Yes, they do. So you can fence them in. You can cover them. But if you do choose to cover them, make sure that you're getting good air circulation and that you haven't blocked out the sun. That's a hard question, but a good one, Sue. Thanks.
I was going to make a comment. I have not done this myself. So when I save my seeds, I haven't been good about bleaching them, but I have read that you can just put your seeds in the freezer for like 3 to 5 days to freeze the pests and insects that are on them. So that may be an alternative to bleaching your seeds.
It is if those seeds can be frozen and still be viable. And most of the seeds you'd want to plant around here probably could be frozen. But some seeds can't be frozen and still be viable. So that would be, we could, if you have a particular seed and you have a question on that, feel free to give us a call. We'll give you a number at the end of the presentation here. And we'll be happy to look up that particular plant for you and let you know whether or not it can be frozen. That will work for insects. It will not work for a lot of diseases. A lot of diseases go dormant when they're frozen, but are still viable, and will go ahead and the disease will continue to grow after it's defrosted. So that's why we say don't use diseased seeds at all.
Thank you.
Good point, though. And it looks like we had another question come in.
Vanessa made a comment that she did not know about the ripeness color for seeds. That was great information.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
And I just wanted to put, there was an earlier comment by Sue that for heirloom, it's usually 50 years to be before they're considered heirloom, 50 years.
Thank you, Sue. Any other questions?
No.
We'll move on. So harvesting your seeds. Once again, if it's for your personal use, they say 1 plant per viable seed. And if you have the space to do that, that is terrific. And something you could actually do that with is something like beans or peas. Squash, I really doubt that you would have the space to grow enough squash in your backyard, if you're growing anything besides squash, to have 1 plant per viable seed. So take that with a grain of salt. Public sharing, they suggest 5 to 10 seeds for variety maintenance. 5 to 10 plants for each seed for variety maintenance. Cultivar maintenance, 20 plants for genetic preservation. So when they're making the seed banks, they're going to collect seeds from 20 different plants minimum, just so that they can have preserved the genetics of the plant. Preparing the seeds for storage. It's essential that the seeds are dry. If you store them before they're dry, they're going to rot or they're going to sprout, one or the other. You don't want either until it's time. Once again, dry them in place on the plant, or you can remove them and dry them in the sun. Oh, those pictures. The one on my left that has the bean on the ground, that's drying on the plant, and the other is a squash. Threshing. This is just a couple of terms here that we're going to use these terms, so I thought I'd give them a definition for you. Threshing is normally done with something like wheat or barley or oats, cereal grains, where it is easier just to take the plant and basically beat it to remove the seeds. Along with that, you will get what is referred to as chaff, and you need to remove the chaff before you store the seeds. So how would you separate the chaff from the seeds? You can winnow it by either blowing or screening or putting it in a paper bag and shaking it until everything's separated, and then picking out the parts that you want. So lots of different ways. I'm sure there's more ways than that. It is best to store your seed for 1 year and then collect new for the next year. Not that the seed won't last longer than that. More than likely it will. But to be safe, you want to try, if it's something you really care about, this came from my great, great, great grandmother and has been passed down in the family for years. You're going to want to try to harvest seed every single year, even if you're planting older seed. Store it in a cool, dry, dark, rodent-free place, probably free from deer and elk and other varmints that might get it too. So if you have mice in your garage or in your basement, you're going to want to protect it. But animals will come and eat your seeds. So try to make sure that there's some place that it's cool, but not too cold, that it's dry so that they don't get wet and start to germinate. And generally you want them in a dark place, but it doesn't have to be total darkness. You can store them in glass jars, pretty metal containers, a cloth bag. In our area, you can put them in a cloth bag and probably be okay, but you might want to put some rice in there just to help absorb any moisture that might get in there since it's cloth. And do not store them in plastic. The plastic itself can leach into the seeds, and that you don't want.
And Deb, there's a question about, can you store your seeds in a paper envelope?
Yes, that's perfectly fine. But you need to put that paper envelope someplace where it will stay dry and critters can't get it. Good question.
And I just was going to comment, because I just did this with my hot pepper seeds. I thought I had air dried them. They were on pot of my dryer, and I put them in plastic bags and they all turned to mold. So do not use those plastic bags to store seeds.
Yeah. That will happen, sadly. Yeah. If they're in the plastic will hold the moisture in. And if they're in paper or cloth, that will tend to absorb some of the moisture. And rice can help, but probably not enough for storing them in a plastic bag. Thanks, Jennifer. Any other questions on storing seeds before we move on to growing the seeds you planted or you saved?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so plant your seeds when it's time and by the preferred method, meaning you may prefer to start them indoors or you may prefer to start them out of doors. So just however it is you would normally plant those seeds, that's how you plant them. You don't need to do anything special for them. Care for them, weed them, water them, prune them, whatever needs to be done for how you would normally care for that plant. Observation. That's really important if you're collecting seed. You want to really pay attention to what happened with the plants that you planted from the seeds so that you can collect seeds from the healthiest of those plants to keep that genetic, those genes going forward, that genetic makeup going forward. Harvest them when it's time, eat them, enjoy them. Make sure you leave some for seed, and then you just repeat. So once again, why would we save seed? Preserving the genes. To get specific characteristics that we want. If you have an heirloom and it shows traits that you particularly like, that's where you'll want to save your seeds. It's a fun thing to do, particularly with children, grandparents can hand down seeds to their grandkids, who can hand it down in the future to their grandkids, on and on and on. And people can say this came from your great 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 grandmother, and it's wonderful. Questions on seed saving before we jump over to seed banks?
No, there aren't.
Okay. Oh, we just got one.
I tried to dry seeds out on the plant last year, but the squirrels ate them all. From Sue.
Well, Sue, squirrels are fun. I know you love the squirrels. So how could you protect them from the squirrels on the plant? Probably their best method is going to be put chicken wire around it. That'll semi prevent them from getting in, but the other is grow 10 times what you really want. That way you have enough for them and enough for you too.
I tried a method with squirrels with my squash because they were eating my squash. And after my squash were pretty well developed, I put plastic tubs around them or plastic containers.
Mhm.
And that worked. I would say that had like 70–80% of my squash I were able to protect that way.
Great. Another thing you can do is plant in containers with slick sides so that they can't, and that are tall enough that they can't climb them to get up into it. So probably those weren't the best of answers that you wanted to hear, but that's pretty much, we live with wildlife. I want them and I want to kill them some days, but I don't. I just love them. Does that answer your question well enough, Sue?
Not really, but I know what the situation is, and everything my veggies and flowers are up against fences, and so they climb around fences and they jump down onto them. So it doesn't matter. And whatever I try to cover it with, it winds up either the wind moves it or they get under it, or I'll just have to plant more. That's all.
I think
Yeah,
that's it. You're just gonna have to plant enough to share with them.
Yeah.
Also, I thought about nylons, you could tie nylons around them, but I don't think we have very many nylons anymore that we used to wear, or some sort of netting possibly that you could tie around them. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you could take a group of seeds and put them in some mesh but they'll still probably eat through it. It's a hard problem.
It really
Well,
is.
the mesh is hard because birds get caught in the mesh.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that either. So
Right.
I just have to plant more. That's all.
That's what I
Thanks.
always do. Yeah, I figure I just plant extra, and if I get extra food, there's lots of places and lots of people that need food. And if I don't get extra food, well, at least maybe I got enough for me and for the animals and some seeds too.
Yeah.
So they asked us to talk about seed banks for a little bit. So I have a picture of some plants on the bank of a river or something. I don't know. It's a pretty picture. There's olives on that tree. What is a seed bank? It's a place where a collection or stock of seeds of different plant varieties and species are stored for use in agriculture or as a safeguard against their possible extinction. I got that right out of Oxford. We have world seed banks and government seed banks and community seed banks and personal seed banks. World seed banks. The Svalbard Global Seed Bank is a global effort to safeguard plants for future generations. And they're in Norway, or actually off the coast of Norway. And they save seeds from all kinds of plants. Maybe mainly isn't true. The majority are going to be food crops, but they do also save some seeds that are just considered plants that are worthy of saving, if for no other reason, because they attract pollinators. And because I can't see it on my screen because it's covered, but up above, the Salt Library did have a seed bank. They were collecting seeds and they are interested in starting that back up. So contact Kathy Click if you are interested in participating that at the Salt Library. And then there's the National Plant Germplasm System, and it's with the land grant universities. Every state in the United States has a land grant university. Ours is Colorado State University, and that's who administers the Master Gardening Program out of Garfield County, all of the extensions. And they provide duplicate storage for the Svalbard Global Seed Bank. So all the land grant universities are storing seeds. So if something were to go wrong at the global one, we would still have seeds here in the United States. And I'm sure, I know other countries do it too. I don't know how many, I'm sorry, I just didn't look that up. But there are other countries that store seeds for duplication also. The closest one to us is Fort Collins at Colorado State University. They give tours. And Jennifer, I'm going to let you talk about that for a minute, if you would, please.
I actually went on a tour where they are looking at the seeds. They put them in a lot of refrigeration and monitor what the germination rate is. So they will take the seeds out and put them with paper towels, see how long it takes to germinate. If they've stored them, they also test the germination rate. And when you go on a tour, they explain the whole process to you, and it's about an hour, and it's very interesting.
Do you need to make an appointment ahead of time? Do you know?
You know, I went on a tour with a group, and I was at the seed lab where they test them versus the library. I haven't done the library tour where they have the seeds stored. Okay. This was kind of the lab where they tested them. And but I do think both of them, you have to register your tour.
That would be my guess. So if that's something someone's interested in, you could either contact Colorado State University itself, or feel free to contact us and we can get you in touch with whoever you need to chat with.
And we also had a comment from Sue Gray, worried that the seeds from a seed library might be hybridized because not everyone participating knows the correct way to avoid it. Is that a legitimate concern? And I think, you know, like where we're looking at the swap or the seed bank at the salt in particular.
Yes. To answer your question, yes. That is always going to be a concern if you're participating in a local seed bank. So thank you for bringing that up. And how would you know? The only way you would know would be to talk with the people who were growing it. I know, Sue, you mentioned to me in another setting that you worked with neighbors, et cetera, for not to grow something that would cross-pollinate with something you were trying to save seeds from. You can do that in your backyard. You can talk with your neighbors on either side and say, hey, I'm growing this, but I want to save seeds. Can we make sure we're far enough apart? Or you could go out every day and hand pollinate, but even at that, you're probably going to get some cross pollination if you're hand pollinating and they're growing something else. So there is always a risk. The Global Seed Bank and CSU's Seed Bank, those seeds are grown in isolation for this purpose. So those would be true. They would be heirlooms. But as far as a local, like the libraries or your next door neighbor or whoever, your garden group, there is a chance that you are in fact going to get a hybrid. Does that help, Sue? She can't really answer me, can she? Except in chat.
She said, yes, thanks. And Marjorie noted that at the Salt Library, it is a double C, it's Kathy, and Click spelled with a C, not a K. If you're
Thank
gonna
you very
contact her.
much. I've always spelled it with a K. I'll fix that. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could suggest how you can stimulate and increase pollinators in your garden.
How to get more pollinators in your garden?
Mm-hmm.
Don't spray pesticides and grow anything that flowers.
Hmm.
That
And
anything
I-
that flowers is
I
going
see
to attract
sometimes they
pollinators.
have like little honeycombs for wild bees or other insects.
Yes, most insects also need water. So if you could have some available water, and they may be able to get enough just from you watering your plants.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry, you brought up another point, but I lost it. Can you repeat yourself?
I was wondering whether or not the enormous interest in community gardens has made any inroads into industrial agriculture, and are you seeing more people living off of their own gardens or the community gardens much more frequently, and keeping some plants that have not been seen for years and years, generating interest again?
We are seeing interest. And with COVID, because if for no other reason, people had time and they were isolated, we saw a lot more people gardening, taking up gardening and attempting to grow as much of their own food as they could. So that's a positive thing about COVID, if we can find a positive there. I think the interest is there, but we haven't actually seen it grow tremendously, but we have seen some growth.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's been really nice since COVID is a lot of the local food banks are accepting produce from regular gardeners. And Colorado Extension Office has a program called Grow and Give, and they actually are tracking the amount of produce that are being given to food banks. And, I think last year there was like, I don't remember, I'm sorry, I totally forget, but I know it was around 50,000, and it could have been almost 500,000 that are people that are producing vegetables and giving them to the food banks. So I thought that was very exciting. And, there's just I don't think we have specifics right now on what the actual change is, but there are a lot of people, asking questions. What do we grow? How do we do a vegetable garden? So it feels like people are kind of returning to their roots a little bit nowadays.
Mhm. The other thing I was wondering is, your presentation is really very interesting. And I was wondering if you could make your slides available to community gardens here and at the library for people to
Sure,
be
anybody who
able to
wants it,
get that information.
yes, anybody who wants it is welcome to it. Alex, are you putting this out on YouTube?
Yes, I am.
So they can also go to YouTube and get it from there too.
Oh,
But
good.
yes, we would love to share the presentation with anyone who is interested.
And Deb, will it be listed under the Master Gardener program in Garfield County?
Well, we certainly can. That's a good idea, isn't it? Thanks, Jennifer.
Sure.
Yeah, the other thing that I was interested in is your Master Gardeners program, as to whether you encourage people to grow medicinal plants and are plant plants that are really important for our community in the parks, in our parks, as a project for the Master Gardeners.
There is a lot of emphasis right now on native plants. And there are a lot of information about growing native plants through the CSU Extension Office. And when you asked about attracting butterflies to your garden, I think it's really important that you do look at using native plants so you can have native butterflies or moths. So it's important to look at what are our native plants of Colorado so we can support the natural pollinators in our communities. And I think Deb may have some other information.
I think, Jennifer, you pretty much covered it. We are beginning to work with some local areas where our Silt has a historical museum, and we're working with them to put in native plants there. There's a project in Rifle where they have created a garden that is growing plants that the Ute Indians would have grown. And then there in Carbondale, you have Sue Gray, who is a former master gardener, and she's doing a lot for your community to preserve species. And sadly, she can't talk with us, but hi, Sue, I heard you were out there. And we appreciate everything you do.
And in regards to medicinal, we would be able to, as master gardeners, find you information about the medicinal. You know, but there are people, everybody who's a master garden has different expertise. And I do think that there are people that are really specialized in the medicinal. But as a master gardener, if you called and said, we would like more information about medicinal, the master gardener person would research that and get that information back to you.
Yep.
Would be great.
And we all know that if you
I
grow
think that-
comfrey,
Does
oh, I was
it-
just going to say, if you grow comfrey as a medicinal plant for its tea leaves, it totally takes over your garden. And it seems like it never can be killed. It's terrible. I've been having some comfrey and we cannot get rid of it. So
I think
that was
that's
just
why
a-
they named it Comfrey. It comes for free.
And then
Yeah,
I
the other
wanted
thing
to-
with medicinal, Nancy, is we can tell you how to grow the plant. We can tell you what it might have been used for in the past. We cannot advise you in any manner on how to use it
Mhm.
yourself
Right.
for a medicinal purpose as a master gardener. However, we can connect you with someone at CSU that in fact can answer those questions for you. We're not qualified as pharmacists or doctors or nurses, so we can find the right answer for you, but as master gardeners, we can tell you how to grow it.
Great, thank you.
And
Alice,
we
Was
I
there
want-
another question there, Nancy?
Yeah, I wanted to encourage people to support seed banks, because, you know, we never know how our food supply may be affected by global climate change, and how important it is to go back to other types of plants that you know, like quinoa is grown in Bolivia, which is, you know, a very harsh climate. So I think that the more you can interest people in supporting food seed banks, especially internationally,
Yes.
would be wonderful.
Thank
And I
you.
have another comment from Sue about seed banks and saving seeds. Her comment is she has been growing heirloom Amish deer tongue lettuce for 10 years. And she has noticed that the seeds are hard to find in catalogs anymore.
Yes,
It's very important for us to keep these varieties alive. And thanks for teaching about our communities to save.
thanks. And thank you for doing that. I've been growing Lola Rosa lettuce seed for 18 years. And it's still pretty common to be able to find it. It's not like the Amish deer tongue. And if anybody's looking for that one, I do know a source or two for that other than Sue Gray. So, but yeah, a lot of the seeds that are old varieties aren't out there that much anymore, and they're hard to find. And if you can get them and you can create a stock for yourself and or your neighbors, that's all the better. And to Nancy's point, to try to support both global and our land grant universities, the seed banks there is a worthy cause. Any
And
other
Deb,
questions, comments?
Deb, we have another question, which is very nice, because we do want to have some native plants, some unstarved vegetables. And Sue asked, can we put the milkweed in with the vegetables?
Yes. As long as you know not to eat the milkweed, yes. You can mix any plants that you want to mix, pretty much any plants you want to mix with your vegetables, especially if you're growing them in containers. It's a nice way to dress up a container where maybe your tomato might not look that pretty. If you add marigolds to it, you're going to attract pollinators, you're going to distract nuisance insects and make your container look a little bit prettier. But yeah, there's no reason not to grow plants amongst your vegetables.
And one thing that was interesting that Drew, our extension office, noted is milkweed is toxic, and showy milkweed is not as toxic as some of the other species, but
Yeah.
for the farmers and the ranchers, they're not that keen on that milkweed in their ranches. So that it was something I just found out. It was kind of interesting. And we do have another comment here.
Yeah.
So Sue wanted to know if anyone knows where we can get the red Mcclure potato.
Yes. You can get them at CRMS plant sale every year.
And also Sue said, if you know other contacts for the red Mcclure potato, she's noted her website in the chat. It's info@carbondalehistory.org.
Great, thanks, Sue.
And then
And,
from
and if you called us, I could probably find some more also. But always feel free. Notice I'm volunteering, Sue. Feel free to ask Sue great questions.
And then
Especially
when-
about historical varieties that are grown historically in Carbondale. She is an authority on that. She probably knows more than most of us would know if we started studying 24 hours a day.
And then we have a question from Wendy, the best way to learn about native plants that grow in our areas. And I have to mention two organizations, the Colorado Native Plant Society and Wild Ones. Their main chapters are in the metro area, but we also have Native Plant Society in the Western Slope. If you go to those websites, they have videos and they show you different areas. There's booklets that talk about landscaping with natives, and they're specific to the metro. There's one for the Western Slopes, one for the mountains. So those are really good resources. And also the Garfield Master Gardener program is putting together some presentations about native plants that grow specifically in Garfield County. And then we will be doing some wildflower walks later this summer to get people familiar with those natives. And Deb, I don't know if you want to add some more information with that.
I think you covered that well, but yes, we are. And if anybody's interested, please let us know, because we'll be doing presentations both via YouTube, in person, as well as the plant walks later in the year that Jennifer spoke about, emphasizing plants that are native to Garfield County.
And so this is another question from Wendy. How do we get in touch with the master? And I think she means the master gardeners.
There we go. So resources. Thank you, Wendy. Garfield County Extension, the phone number for it is 970-625-3969. Drew is the agriculture person at the extension, and you can ask for him, or you can just ask to speak with the Colorado Master Gardener, and they'll hand that off to Jennifer or myself or any of our cohorts, and we'll be glad to help you. The website is extension.colostate.edu. And there's a wealth of information out there on growing. I, for some reason, don't have it on here. Grow and Give. If you Google that, you would get a ton of information on how to grow, as well as how to donate if you have extra. And then there's some others listed here. The 1/3 from the bottom up, seedsavers.org, the crop chart, that's a really nice chart on when to plant, when to grow, what to grow.
It also includes how it pollinates.
Yes. So there's a bunch of resources for you. I wish we were in person because I could hand them out to you, but I can't. So at least you can go look at them here and we'll save us a tree.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful hour with you, and we hope to have you do another one on another subject like you did last year with the container gardening. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And thanks everybody who attended. We appreciate it. And do feel free to contact the county and ask questions. We love to help people.
All right. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and I will have the video ready for you guys tomorrow morning to share throughout your own platforms. And anybody who was with us today, who knows anybody who wanted to come but couldn't be here, we will have that recording on the YouTube page of the Garfield County Libraries, as well as Facebook.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Alex.
you, Alex. Thank you, Alex, for everything.
Thanks, everybody. Let
Good
us know
night.
if you want more presentations and on what.
All right.
Good evening.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.